Hello, BookTube. The other day, I was watching a video on Rachel Mauro's channel. Would you read more? One of those challenge videos where you read the beginning of a book out loud and ask your viewers what any reader essentially asks themselves, which is, do I want to continue? Do I want to go on based on just the stuff at the front of the shop? And she actually tagged me to do this, and I'm happy to give it a try. I saw it on Lukash's channel as well, Cruel Reader's Thesis. I'll leave a link to both of them down below. Two terrific booktubers. And they took two different approaches. And here I have to say that I like Rachel's approach better. Lukash took the challenge on its literal face. Read the first line of a selection of books and see basically if you would want to read the second line, but also if there's enough intriguing stuff there for you to think about reading the book. Rachel took a broader approach of saying, well, not the first line, but rather the book's introduction. Not necessarily the introduction with the capital I, and not necessarily the first chapter, but the first breath that it takes. And I agree with that better. So we're gonna try that organically here with a stack of books that are all recent arrivals on this channel. So we'll be going through them together, and we will start with The Executioner. This is Sicilian Slaughter, number 16 in Mac Bolan's Executioner series. But it's by Jim Peterson, and one of you very, very fascinatingly informed me that there was some sort of contractual kerfuffle with Mac Bolan about the right to write this character, and that while that was going on, this book came out. And that the series eventually went on to be written by other talentless hacks. but this early on, this is an exception. I thought that was fascinating. I don't know what it says about the quality one way or another. We're going to find out together. This is The Executioner, Sicilian Slaughter. This is a book about a man who has a one-man war on the mafia and decides in this novel to take the fight to their home in Sicily. So let's read the beginning of this just a bit. This one has a prologue. These action adventure novels always put on airs and graces. Besides panic, death, destruction, and total disorganization of the local mafiosi, the Executioner left oceans of blood behind in Philadelphia, including too much of his own. That's how it starts. That's how it starts. By the time he crossed the George Washington Bridge in wildcard John Cavaretta's $40,000 Maserati, Mac Bolan felt his strength and vitality at a dangerously low ebb. He had gunshot wounds in the left leg, his face, and most dangerous of all his wounds, Bolan still carried a slug in his side. With gently probing fingertips, he could feel the damn thing. The wound in his leg and side still leaked red. Bolan had seen men die of shock, knew its symptoms intimately, and finally acknowledged to himself that he must have help fast. Okay, so I think it's a little bit unfair to ask the question, would you read more, if the book starts with a character driving away from New York City, having just been shot in the face, or Philadelphia, pardon me. The character is shot in the face. Obviously, you're going to want to read a little more, at least. So that was maybe a loaded way to start. But we'll move on now to My Annihilation by Fuminori Nakamura. This is, we'll have to take this with slightly a grain of salt because this is a translated work. I think this may be the only translated work in the pile here. So you have to keep in mind, this is translated from the Japanese by Sam Bett, who's done quite a bit. He's a very experienced translator, but still you never know. Still you never know. So let's see how this one starts. And I will just trust that the organic nature of its first breath will be obvious. I haven't actually started this book, but I'll trust that the place to stop will be obvious. And I'm saying that with a little bit of trepidation, because contemporary fiction, written in any language, is usually so bad, so limp, so worthless, that it doesn't have anything like natural breath or natural breathing in it, so you wouldn't know where to stop, because you wouldn't have any sane reason to start unless you were a book critic. Let's see, because we've got a big number one, so we know where to start. A cramped room in a rundown mountain lodge, and on the desk a manuscript, left open to page 1, as if it had been waiting here for ages to be read. Okay, so first line is not a sentence. The only other piece of furniture, a simple bed. No comma after the word furniture. Should be one there. The wood floor creaked with every step. Okay, so there's a step. The slight breeze was enough to set the thin glass of the tired window rattling. My thoughts went to the various forms of identification in my bag. An insurance card, a certificate of residence, even a pension booklet, all under the name Ryodai Kozuka. Born in 1977, he was 2 years older than me. That should be 2 years older than I was. Right? It's not me. That's just wrong. It might be colloquial, but it's wrong. Japanese standards for applying for IDs are a joke. None of these cards had a photograph of me, but I could use them to apply for a passport that did. Trading places with Ryodai Kozuka. Okay, that last line is not a sentence. I looked at the text of the pages. The paper was old, bound simply with a clip. This manuscript had to have been written by Ryodai Kozuka. An account, or even the life story of the man whose place I was about to take. A white suitcase stood in the corner of the room. My heart beat a little faster. I hadn't brought that suitcase here. That must be where it was. Kozuka's body. Trees danced outside the window as if to tell me of the sinister nature of this place, but I had understood immediately what to do. Bury that suitcase in the forest, and this would be all over. Turn this page, and you may give up your entire life, or so the first page said. But I had no intention of giving my old life up. He might have left behind unfinished business, but it was no business of mine. All I wanted was his identity. Okay. Okay. Fairly, I mean, it's inept, but it's fairly intriguing, right? I think you probably want to read more. You might have your doubts. I think Mac Bolan would be the first person to point out that you can't put a body in a suitcase, no matter what you do with it, unless the suitcase is so enormous that it doesn't have the word suitcase to it. But we're told at the beginning that the room is bare, that the floor creaks when you walk on it. How did the narrator miss a white suitcase? No idea, but even so, the setup there, that the narrator is not the man and doesn't care to know anything about the man whose life he's about to assume, is interesting. So would you read more? I don't mean to, I told myself ahead of time that when I did this video, I would not do the bit from Starship Troopers. Do you want to know more? If I had any editing skills, I'd be so tempted to just add that at the end of every one of these books. But I don't have any editing skills. Lucky for you. This would all be Beagle footage. But anyway, the next one we're going to do is Peter Godfrey Smith's book, Other Minds. It's about non-human intelligence, it's been hugely blurbed, hugely praised. Let's see where it starts. Okay, chapter 1. All right. On a spring morning in 2009, Matthew Lawrence, I presume that's a scientist, and not the cutest of the Lawrence brothers. Matthew Lawrence dropped the anchor of his small boat at a random spot in the middle of the blue ocean bay on the east coast of Australia and jumped over the side. That is insane. The east coast of Australia is Shark City. But anyway, he swam down on scuba to where the anchor lay, picked it up, and waited. The breeze on the surface nudged the boat, which started to drift, and Matt, holding the anchor, followed. This bay is well known for diving, but divers usually visit only a couple of spectacular locations. As the bay is large and typically pretty calm, Matt, a scuba enthusiast who lives nearby, had begun a program of underwater exploration, letting the breeze carry the empty boat around above him until his air ran out and he swam back up to the anchor line. On one of these dives, roaming over a flat, sandy area scattered with scallops, he came across something unusual. A pile of empty scallop shells, thousands of them, were roughly centered around what looked like a single rock. On the shell bed were about a dozen octopuses, each in a shallow, excavated den. Matt came down and hovered beside them. The octopuses each had a body about the size of a football or smaller. They sat with their arms tucked away. They were mostly brown-gray, but their colors changed moment by moment. Their eyes were large and not too dissimilar to human eyes, except for the dark horizontal pupils like cat's eyes turned on their side. The octopuses watched Matt and also watched one another. Some started roaming around. They'd haul themselves out of their dens and move over the shell bed in an ambling shuffle. Sometimes this elicited no response from others, but occasionally a pair would dissolve into a multi-armed wrestle. The octopuses seemed to be neither friends nor enemies, but in a state of complicated coexistence, as if the scene were not sufficiently strange, many baby sharks, each just 6 inches or so long, lay quietly on the shells as the octopuses roamed around them. Okay, so it goes on from there. But it starts in a very Jules Verne kind of way, a weird ceremony at the bottom of this bay. So it's not a gripping opening, but it is fascinating. It gives you a sense that the book, that it will prove true in the book, that you are going to get a real up-close look at the natural world. So would you read more? let's move on to the next one. Also nature writing. This is Dan Flores' book, Coyote America. This also has been universally praised, but we're going to treat it as if it weren't and see just how it begins. Okay, the first thing it begins is a beautiful picture. Oh my. What does the caption say? Few creatures on Earth possess a biography to match the coyotes. Well, okay, but also that is beautiful. Oh my. All right, so this starts with an introduction. Here is a vivid memory. I am on winter break from my university duties, and I am home visiting my parents in Louisiana. We are up early, stirring around in the kitchen in a gray, misty dawn in our hometown near the Black Bayou in the north of the state. My dad knows the paper will be already in the mailbox and asked me to walk out to the end of the driveway to fetch it in. I am in the act of pulling the Shreveport Times out of the box of silvery blue twilight when I hear a rhythmic clatter and the scratching of toenails on the asphalt street. Plastic-wrapped newspaper in hand, I turn towards the commotion and find myself staring into the face of a coyote, which shoots me a quick sidelong glance as it passes by mere feet away, rocking along in that characteristic lope with many coyotes go through the world, close enough to pepper my ankles with dislodged gravel as it digs in to swerve past me. I register hot yellow eyes and something in its mouth. Maybe it's the neighbor's cat, although in the dim light it looks more like a trio of tall boys dangling from a plastic six-pack ring. Open-mouthed, I follow its course down the street when a second coyote appears, weaving through 3 cars parked on the road opposite my parents' home. Pink tongue lolling, this one fixes me with a look that has something of a been good to know you wave as it passes, and in another couple of seconds, it is at the corner intersection at the center of the block. There it turns for an instant, turns to look back at me, then is gone in a movement I barely discern, like smoke dispersed by a sudden swirl of wind. Coyote number 2 seems empty-handed, and I register the thought and tell my dad back in the kitchen. Ah, those look like pull-tab beers anyway, so no bottle opener needed. I tell this story not because it is unusual, but for exactly the opposite reason. In 21st century America, likely 100 scenes something like this unfold in towns and cities across the coast every morning. Okay, pretty effective. You can understand why so many people who bought this book continued to read it. So then we'll move on to another book that just recently appeared on this channel. This is How Fiction Works by James Wood. Don't be fooled by the pompous title. This is actually a very good book. I just recently found a nice hardcover of it. So we will go right to the beginning. Okay, so we've got a preface, we've got a note on footnotes and dates. I swear, the members of my profession are so prone to this kind of pompous bloviating. Let's go to the beginning. The beginning of the book, under the heading Narrating, has a little section, helpfully titled 1. It's not the chapter 1, it's just section 1. A house of fiction has many windows, but only 2 or 3 doors. I can tell a story in the third person or in the first person, and perhaps in the second person singular or the first person plural, though successful examples of these latter 2 are rare indeed. And that is it. Anything else probably will not much resemble narration. It may be closer to poetry or prose poetry. Okay, so that is the opening. And as you can see, this is just little sections, one after another. And they go on. They go on. Look at how small 3 is. Look at how big 4 is. They go on, and that is an unsatisfactory opening. It's just a character pontificating. So let's see if the preface is a little bit more welcoming. The preface will technically be the first thing you encounter. In 1857, John Ruskin, oh my, there goes any hope of being welcoming. John Ruskin wrote a little book called The Elements of Drawing. It is a patient primer intended by casting a critic's eye over the business of creation to help the practicing painter, the curious viewer, the ordinary art lover. Ruskin begins by urging his readers to look at nature, to look, say, at a leaf, and then to copy it in pencil. He includes his own drawing of a leaf. He moves from leaf to a painting by Tintoretto. Notice the brushstrokes, says Ruskin. See how he draws the hands. Look at how he pays attention to the shading. Step by step, Ruskin takes his readers through the process of creation. His authority comes not from his own technique as a draftsman. He was an accomplished artist, but not a greatly gifted one, but from what his eye has seen and how well, and his ability to transmit that vision into prose. There are surprisingly few books like this about fiction. E.M. Forster's Aspects of the Novel, published in 1927, is canonical for good reason, but now seems imprecise. I admire Milan Kundera's 3 books on the art of fiction, but Kundera is a novelist and essayist rather than a practical critic. Occasionally we want his hand to be a bit inkier with text. Okay. All right. Well, you're going to take my word for it. You don't want to read more of that. Obviously you don't. Not only is the author immediately setting himself up as the equal to Milan Kundera and John Ruskin, not only is the author obviously setting the stage for him to say, here is the book you have been looking for, and not only is that off-putting, but also it's boggy. It feels like a footnote. It feels like some sort of pompous digression. And so do the little sections in the front. They feel like you're interrupting a great man as he jots in his commonplace book. You're just going to have to take my word for it. This pays off a lot more than that seems. But as far as an inviting opening goes, no. No. So let's move on. Move on to something we just got on this channel, brand new. This is a new translation with commentary of 50 Letters of a Roman Stoic by Seneca. The translation is by Marbert Graver and A.A. Long. And this presents us with the practical problems of what do we read first? Do we read the beginning, which is the translator's preface? Do we read the beginning of the introduction? We certainly don't need to worry about Seneca. He can take care of himself. So let's read the beginning of the introduction and leave the preface for experts. The best way to learn about Seneca as a person and as a philosopher is to read his letters. Begun late in his life, the letters on ethics adhere to a format that he himself devised and that proved especially congenial to his talents. And there's a footnote right there, right away, on the second sentence. There are serious writings. These are serious writings, usually the intimacy of the personal letter as a vehicle for searching examination of values and life choices. In this, they resemble the letters of the philosopher Epicurus, which Seneca had studied extensively. Unlike Epicurus, though, Seneca addresses all his letters to one individual, his younger friend Gaius Lucilius Junior. The collection does not include any letters written by the friend, and yet Lucilius is constantly made present to us through frequent references to his life experiences and his questions about philosophy. As a reader, we come to feel that we know both men on a deep level. Still, these letters are not private correspondence like Cicero's letters to his friend Atticus. They are meant to be shared with a wider public, to bring comfort in difficult times, intellectual engagement, and sheer entertainment to those outside the author's own circle. Okay, pellucid. And straight to the point. The best way to know Seneca is to read this book, the book that I have translated and am presenting to you. You would probably have to be dedicated to reading the book to want to read it just from that. The point about a book like 50 Letters of a Roman Stoic is that you will be dedicated to reading it. For a book like this, I would argue, most people will just skip all the preparatory stuff. They'll go straight to the translation. So again, we sidestep the issue just a bit. Then we'll move on to something else. This is contemporary fiction. This is a slim novel by Carla, I can't read her name from the type font on the cover, Guelfenbein? Carla Guelfenbein, the author of 6 novels and several short story collections. And this is her new book, comes out at the end of the year, the very end of the year, One in Me I Never Loved. Very hard to read. It's a requisite hideous American cover, but it's also hard to read. It's hard to know what you're looking at. Let's see how this begins. The first chapter is called Margarita. The last time Jorge wanted to have sex with me, I asked him to use a condom. That's the first sentence. One with a Jenny Holzer slogan on it. That was 3 weeks ago, before the vacation ended and his students got back from their yachts and other summer retreats. He stared and then burst out laughing. He didn't ask who Jenny Holzer was. I mean it, I said. If you want to make love, it'll have to be with a condom, and kindly make it a Jenny Holzer condom. We were lying on the bed, him naked, me with my nightshirt around my ankles. Children's shouts carried in from outside. Maybe they were playing soccer in the street, deserted by the students. Jorge stood up and regarded me from the heights of his nudity. He looked utterly confident. imagining, I suppose, that his virility would quell my insurrection. I noticed that the flesh of his stomach had gone. From some part of his life, he extracts time to go to the gym. From the part that should be from me, clearly, because I see less and less of him. I turned over and pulled the sheet right up over my head. My body, unlike his, is expanding and collapsing a little more each day, ceasing, wilting, falling in on itself in weary rolls. Sometimes I hardly recognize it as mine. Okay, well, I'd love to hear from the rest of you. I wouldn't want to read any more of that, but especially since, as is the way with contemporary fiction, it seems pretty clear that the narrator and main character of the book is going to be someone we are going to be expected to like, who is self-evidently odious, self-absorbed, weird, cranky, unlikable. But I could be wrong. It could be that that is the whole gimmick of the opening of the book. Did that appeal to you? Would you read more? Well, we'll continue here. We'll continue with just a few more books and then we'll be done. Just to go through some of the books that have come here recently from my last book hauls. Like, for instance, Why Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys. This has one of the most famous openings of all contemporary fiction. We'll just go straight to it. We'll pass the introduction. I think most people will pass the introduction. And just start with part one. They say when trouble comes, close ranks. So with the white people did. But we were not in their ranks. The Jamaican ladies had never approved of my mother, because she pretty like pretty self, Christophine said. She was my father's second wife, far too young for him, they thought, and worse still, a Martinique girl. When I asked her why so few people came to see us, she told me that the road from Spanish Town to Colibri Estate, where we lived, was very bad, and that road repairing was now a thing of the past. My father, visitors, horses, feeling safe in bed, all belonged to the past. There's not much to say about that. I think this is a case much like Seneca, where it probably doesn't do us any good to talk about the openings of canonical works, because they're not, nowadays anyway, they're not expecting to have to hook you with their first sentence. That's a fairly clunky opening. But we'll move on to something that is not canonical, but it is still old. It is Indian Summer by William Dean Howells. I just found this Library of America volume. So there won't be much in the way of an introduction. This one's by John Updike, so they gave it more room than they usually do. But let's just start off with the beginning here. Midway of the Ponte Vecchio in Florence, where three arches break the line of the little jeweler's booths glittering on either hand and open an approach to the parapet, Colville lounged against the corner of a shop and stared out upon the river. It was the late afternoon of a day in January, which had begun bright and warm, but had suffered a change of mood as its hours passed, and now from a sky dimmed with flying gray clouds was threatening rain. There must already have been rain in the mountains, for the yellow torrent that seethed and swirled around the piers of the bridge was swelling momentarily on the wall of Longarno, and rolling a threatening flood towards the Cascine, where it lost itself under the ranks of the poplars that seemed to file across its course and let their delicate tops melt into the pallor of the low horizon. Okay, Jamesian and terrible. It pretty much puts up a big neon sign saying, do not read anymore. And again, you have to take my word for it, that past that, it's tough to open a book with topography. It generally shows a lazy writer. And there are some examples to the contrary, but that is pretty foreboding. If you read that opening paragraph and were of a fleet-minded disposition, you would not read anymore. But you should. If you want, you should, because it's a pretty good novel. Then we'll move on to Count Belisarius by Robert Graves. Let's see how this one starts. We will once again skip the foreword. When he was 7 years old, Belisarius was told by his widowed mother that it was now time for him to leave her for a while, and her retainers of the household, an estate in Thracian Tecmera, and go to school at Adrianople, a city some miles away, where he would be under the guardianship of her brother, the distinguished Modestus. She bound him by an oath on the Holy Scriptures, she was a Christian of the Orthodox faith, that he would fulfill the baptismal oath sworn on his behalf by his godparents, both of whom were recently dead. Belisarius took this oath, renouncing the world, the flesh, and the devil. Okay, all right, we're not doing too well. We're not doing too well. As far as a novel about one of the greatest generals in Roman history goes, that's a pretty abysmal opening. But it fits with the program that Robert Graves wants to do in this book, which is to write a kind of stately, lightly fictionalized version of the life of Belisarius as we can draw it from the sources of the day. Not an advisable plan for a work of fiction, but we have two more shots here. And they are shots in the dark. Because I have not read either one of these books. They're both brand new to me. The first is The Case of the Counterfeit Codicil by P.J. Fitzsimmons. And this is a murder mystery. The first, Ansi Bwadjoli murder mystery. It starts right away on chapter 1. You can tell that this is self-published or subsidy published because the table of contents faces the first page. See, you don't get any of the room that you do to maneuver. Let's see here. The first chapter 1 is called "The Enigmatic Encounter on the 1642 from Charing Cross," and the first thing in the title is a quote in all caps: "Come at once. Stop. Uncle Seb dead. Stop. Defenestrated by unseen hands. Stop. Fiddles." And then the book begins. "Rummy missive," I said to Carnaby, steward of the Juniper Gentlemen's Club. He'd just read the telegram aloud for my benefit, my hands being otherwise occupied with a whiskey and soda siphon. "What do you make of it?" "I would hazard that someone of your acquaintance has been pushed from a window by a person or persons unknown, sir," Carnaby gleaned with this without so much as touching the paper, which he carried on a doily on a pewter salver. "You're quite certain it's for me, Carnaby?" I asked, reclining now with my bracer in a worn leather armchair of the species native to deep burgundy-toned salons with rosewood wainscoting and high-paned windows giving on to the chattering street in Mayfair. Okay. We don't need to go any further. That is an author trying too hard. So let's move on to the final book here. This is An Italian Elegy by M. Black. Also completely unknown to me. Also, I suspect small press or self-published. Let's read the beginning of this one and then we'll finish up. "It sometimes happens on the bus that I lapse into daydreaming in Italian. This fact in and of itself is not so surprising. I am Italian, and the bus ride is often a long and boring one. What is interesting for me is the effect this internal distraction has on my ear for the English language. Although it is my second language, I have lived in America for almost 17 years now, and even before then I spoke and understood English with some degree of proficiency. So it is not easy for me to remember how English first sounded to me before I comprehended words and meanings. But in those minutes of reverie in Italian, I am struck suddenly alert by the voices I do not understand and I remember. Of course, I can't remember the very first time I heard English spoken. In Trento, the small town in northern Italy where I was born and where I lived until I came to San Francisco, there was always a few English-speaking tourists about. In the winter, they came to ski, and in the summer, they sometimes stopped en route to Austria and Germany, or, coming from there, stop en route to the more alluring cities in Italy. Trento, and as I speak as a native, is not a major city on anyone's map. The town sits on the railway line between Rome and Munich, and if not for this happenstance, almost no one would ever visit it. The Council of Trent is okay. All right, we're not doing well. The main character is reflecting on the fact that occasionally he will lapse into private reveries in Italian, even though he has been long acquainted with English and English-speaking people. But the text of that opening of the book in no way mimics Italian. And it doesn't seem believable. It is very, very much English prose. And on top of that, you follow up a reflection on the fact that you sometimes fall into Italian reveries with the reason why, or with something personal. You don't follow it up with guidebook information about the Council of Trent. You don't do that. That is the way that you will lose your audience, not retain them. So as far as these, I'm not going to make a Steve pyramid, but as far as these go, it looks like the nature writing books were the winners. They certainly pull you in a lot easier than a lot of this fiction does. So I don't know what we learned from this, except that maybe this belongs on the heading of AuthorTube rather than BookTube. We'll do a study of openings in a series of AuthorTube videos at some later date. In the meantime, I'll wrap this up for now, and I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.